Aloha, welcome to Pacific Coffee Research. Today we're going to be showing you a demonstration on how to cup coffee. This is Madeline Longoria Garcia, co-owner of Pacific Coffee Research. She's a licensed Q grader and this year's head judge for the cupping competition.
And this is Brittany Horn, also co-owner of Pacific Coffee Research. She's the chair of the cupping committee for the cupping competition this year, as well as the roaster for all of the samples that have been submitted.
So the first thing that we're going to talk about today are the different tools that we're utilizing when we're cupping coffee. First thing up, we have our cupping bowls. You're going to want 5 of the exact same cup, identical in shape and size, for each one of your coffees. Then we're also going to need a rinse cup as well. So we're going to utilize the same exact shape and size, but not to be confused, the 6th one is for rinsing your water.
Next up, we'll talk about the spoons that we use. So we actually have 2 different types of spoons here. One is primarily used for skimming, while the other is used for scooping coffee. So this protocol has actually changed a little bit since COVID, but we'll actually use the scooping spoon to pick up a dose of coffee and place it into a tasting cup, which is what we'll actually sip from instead of directly with the spoon.
Then we're going to use a gram scale. We like these CJ4000s, but you can use whatever gram scale that you might have around. It needs to at least dose, ideally, to a 1/10 of a gram.
What also goes along with all of this is a timer. As we're brewing the coffees, we want to keep time, and we also want to make sure that we're going through the motions of everything within 4 minutes and we'll get into this a little bit more when we actually demonstrate, but a timer is definitely a necessary tool to have as well.
Then we have our handy spittoons. You can use a cup, you can use a bowl, you can use the ground if that's your thing, but we like to use a spittoon. In between each cup that we are tasting from, we are actually going to aspirate the coffee over our palate, and then we're going to spit that coffee back out. Partially because we don't want to ingest 30 cups worth of caffeine, but also when you drink something, the aftertaste stays kind of lodged in your sinuses and can linger from cup to cup. So if you're analyzing several different coffees on a table, this just helps mitigate a lingering aftertaste that might impede on your ability to fairly qualify other coffees on the table.
And of course, because there's a lot of liquid and things going on, we want to make sure we have towels too. And so usually each set will have 1 towel that corresponds with it. So you can tap your spoon on it so any excess water comes off, and just to help keep the whole space clean and tidy as well.
The next tool that you want to have in your kit is a kettle. These Hario kettles with a gooseneck spout are great for dosing water directly into your cupping bowl and having plenty of control over where the water is going. These ones also have a nice quick spout, so it's not pouring really slowly. There are plenty of other options on the market. We also really like the Brewista kettles. These are great if you're cupping several coffees on a table.
And now getting into some other tools. We use this cupping form, and this is the SCA cupping form that's used globally and is the form that we use to evaluate coffees all the time, whether it's a cupping competition or doing quality analysis. This is what we're always using, and this is the form that gives us the scores for all of the coffees. We're not going to go into the details of how to use this form, but it is a really excellent tool when you're cupping coffees and grading them on the globally accepted scale.
And then of course, you need coffee. We're not going to talk about how to roast for sample roasting today, but you're welcome to contact us if you're ever interested in taking a workshop on sample roasting. But we have coated coffees. They're all roasted to SCA cupping specs. And then we like to make sure that everything is coated so that as the cuppers are moving around the table, They don't have any bias about what this coffee is, how it was processed, who it might have been processed by. They're going into it completely blind.
And another great tool to have on hand, especially when you're learning about all of these things and how to cup, is to have the Coffee Taster's Flavor Wheel. And this is a tool developed by the Specialty Coffee Association and World Coffee Research. It's a wonderful reference point for better understanding and explaining what you're experiencing in a coffee. And we actually keep a copy of this posted on our back wall, so folks who are cupping in this room can always kind of look at that if they're not quite sure how to identify something that they're tasting in a coffee.
The last tool that we're going to talk about are tasters. In this cupping competition, we have 5 licensed Q graders who are going to be cupping these coffees and giving feedback. That means they have a lot of experience tasting coffees from all around the world and can give really thorough feedback and utilize the SCA cupping form that Madeline showed you before. If you're just starting out, that's fine. But the more experience you have with tasting coffee and the more experience you have with cupping coffee, specifically using this protocol, the better information that you can provide without being so subjective. So we're talking about using humans as tools. And we're not perfect. We don't have the same experiences. We don't have the same preferences. But that's why it's great to use a tool like the SCA cupping form so that you have a set number of characteristics that you're describing. And that's why it's even better to have lots of experience with tasting coffee and cupping coffees from around the world.
One of the other really important tools to have is a grinder. But not just any grinder, a burr grinder is really what we want for this. The one that we have has quite a range of micro adjustments that can be made, and it allows us to have more control over the quality of the grind. Ideally, it's about a medium coarse grind. There are specific numbers that you can look up and how big those particles should be, but a medium coarse grind, and the most important thing is to make sure that you're just being consistent with every single cup that you're grinding through there.
So we talked about kettles before, and now we're going to talk about what we're putting in the kettles to brew the coffee, and that's water. You want your water to be about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take a couple degrees, and 93 degrees Celsius. Your water should be clean and odor-free. There's lots of specifics about what's in your water and how many parts per million that water should be, but as long as you're using clean, odor-free water around that temperature consistently, you should be able to cup your coffees. What we do here to ensure consistency is we use reverse osmosis water, where it's pure H2O, and we actually use these third wave water mineral packs that remineralize the water exactly up to spec.
And so as we get started, we're gonna first dose out our coffee. And we use a 12-gram dose for each of the cups. And that's because these cupping bowls hold about 220 milliliters of water. And our goal is to have a 1:18 brew ratio. Now, our final cup is only gonna have about 4 or 5 grams of coffee because this is our purge dose. And this is to just run through the grinder to make sure that any particulate left over from the previous coffee is not going to then affect this set of coffee.
So the coffees have been evenly dosed in each one of the cups and ground, the same particle size. The next thing that's gonna happen is Madeline's going to smell the dry ground coffee. She's going to smell each one of these 5 cups, which are numbered 1 through 5 in a diagonal pattern, and that's according to the SCA cupping form. You'll also notice that she's not picking up any of the cups or shaking them. The reason for this is every time you shake the dry ground coffee, it releases volatile compounds into the air, which over time will decrease the intensity of the fragrance, and we want to observe it just as it is in the cup.
So next, Britt is gonna start pouring water over the coffee. And the goal here is to just have as consistent of a pour for every cup so the agitation of the coffee isn't different from one cup to the next. And we just wanna fill it all the way up to the brim. And what happens is that a lot of the coffee grounds actually sit on the top and create this little cake as the coffee brews. Once we've started to pour the coffee, we will let each cup brew for 4 minutes, which is why we have the timer. And at 4 minutes, we'll do what's called the break, and we'll explain that once we get there. The last cup we pour is our rinse cup, and that's just to make sure that we have somewhere to rinse our spoons off in between each cup. So we never want to carry coffee over from one cup to the next because we want to be able to evaluate each coffee individually.
This is a really ritualistic moment during the cupping protocol. It's called the break. So Madeline is observing the wet aroma of each one of these cups, as well as slowing down the brewing process. She's not agitating the coffee, she's simply just pushing the wet grounds that are floating in the top of the cup towards the bottom. She's being consistent, just about 3 or 4 times on each one of the cups, and she's smelling each one of the cups in the same order that we've been working throughout this whole process. At this point, I'll now begin to skim all of the leftover floating grinds and bubbles off of the cups.
And so same thing with Brit, she's not dipping down to agitate the coffee at all. She's just scooping all of the foam and the coffee grounds that are floating at the top. And we just want to clean these so that when we taste the coffee, we're not getting all of that extra residue in our mouths. And again, we just want to make sure that every time we go through the coffees, we're going in the same order, and she's being careful to make sure that it doesn't drip over any of the other coffee cups here. And if anybody's wondering why we do 5 cups of the same coffee, is we're not just evaluating what the coffee tastes like, but what is also a part of evaluating the quality is understanding how consistent and uniform the coffee is across the board. And so it's important to keep everything separate and not kind of cross-contaminate one cup with the other, because if there is a problem in one cup, like a defect, we don't want to carry that over to the rest of the cups. And if there is a defect in one cup, we need to identify that and point that out. And then it gives us a better idea of what might be going on in that entire lot of coffee. And then before we start cupping, we just want to have a fresh cup of water for our rinse cup so that we're not getting any of that residue and the coffee grounds in our mouths again. And at this point, we're basically just waiting for the coffee to cool down because it's very hot right now. And so if I were to go in and start tasting this coffee, I'll probably burn my mouth and I won't be able to taste the rest of the coffee very well. And so just giving it a few minutes to cool off, and then we'll start sipping the coffees.
So it's been about 10 minutes, and depending on the temperature, the ambient temperature of the room that you're cupping in, generally between 8 and 11 minutes you can start cupping when the coffee is comfortable and still hot. So Madeline just warmed up her tasting cup, and now she is going through and tasting each one of these coffees and remembering to dip her spoon in the water in between each slurp. She's also not touching her spoon to her tasting cup so that there's no possibility of spreading germs. She's observing the flavor of the coffee, overall flavor notes of the coffee, the aftertaste, the acidity. She's thinking about the body, balance, and sweetness of this coffee and how they overall blend together and balance together. As you can see as well, I am not interfering while she's at this set of cups. Once she steps away, then it's my turn to proceed and start observing and analyzing this set of cups. So, it's my turn.
when we cup coffee, we'll actually go through each set about 3 times. So the first pass that we do is when the coffee is still quite hot. The second is when it's starting to cool down a little bit, and we're actually trying to focus on a few different attributes compared to the first pass. So as Britt mentioned earlier, the first pass, we're looking at flavor, aftertaste, and acidity. The second pass, we're really focusing more on body, overall, and balance of the coffee. And then the third pass is to just kind of do a rounding out and really seeing how the coffee cools down and how it kind of holds together or if it falls apart. And that will affect the overall score of the coffee as well.
We're also keeping in mind any defects that might be present or any uniformity issues, as Madeline mentioned before.
The whole process should take really no more than 25 minutes. So by the time the coffee has been on the table for 25 minutes, it's really cooled down to the point where you're not going to get much more out of it afterwards.
We're also being really careful not to shift the table at all while coffees are on the table. We don't want to disturb and increase the extraction rate of the coffee, so we're just being really careful not to disrupt anything or disturb. Right now we're talking during this cupping because we're giving you a demonstration of how this works. But we don't usually talk during a cupping. It's a really meditative practice actually. So you really want to be in a clear mindset, not distracted. We don't want to have any fragrances coming in through our cupping lab. We really want to be focused on these coffees. So nice to have a neutral environment without any real distractions.
A couple of other little etiquette rules are just to keep your tools and all of the stuff that you're using in one space. Don't let it spread out kind of across the cupping table, especially since we have extra tools now. Another big thing is that if you have finished cupping one set of coffees, don't leave your spoon in the bowl, in the rinse bowl, because the next person who comes in is gonna just like hit your spoon every single time that they rinse. And so once you've finished a set, just kind of stepping to the side and letting the next person come over as you write your notes down and evaluate the coffee before moving on to the next set of coffee. On a typical cupping table, we usually have 6 samples. So we have 6 sets of 5 cups. And so you're moving through and you're moving around a table in a pretty organized manner. And we're trying to just not cause any like bottlenecks of traffic as we're moving around and things like that.
So we move in the same direction around the table.
Exactly.
Once all of the cuppers have completed the table, we'll all leave the cupping room and sit down at the conference room. We're going to then discuss what our scores were and deliberate the results from that round. We'll talk about some of the similarities, some of the differences that we might have found, and we'll make sure that we're all really calibrated. That's also a great opportunity for us to drink water and stay hydrated.
Mm-hmm. It's also where we identify defects with the rest of the group. And so it's really important that if we are identifying a defect in a coffee, that everybody's in agreement that that was there. And so we just want to make sure that we're scoring all of the coffees as fairly and equally as possible. And a lot of that just comes down to this deliberation we do with the whole group.
During the cupping competition, these cuppers do up to 6 tables in a day. So that's about 36 coffees. And each round in total takes almost an hour. So spending about 25 minutes at the table, then breaking down. Our facilitators who are super helpful with keeping things clean and keeping things moving. But then deliberation takes about a half an hour, especially if there is any kind of, if there's a coffee that's really worth talking about.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things during deliberation is we share our scores with each other. So Britt, as the chair of the cupping committee as well, is tracking all of the scores as we're voicing them around during that deliberation. So then everything is put into a spreadsheet, and it now lives not on paper because these things can get lost or damaged. And she's the one who's just making all of the notes and making sure that everything is coming together correctly.
And at the end of the cupping competition, you'll actually get those results. And you'll get scores from each one of the cuppers all the way down to the score for each one of these different characteristics that's on the SCA cupping form. So it's a really informative opportunity for growers to learn a lot more about their coffees from these different Q graders. So you can expect that within a week after the results are announced.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found this informative and insightful into the cupping process. Congratulations to all of the coffee producers who entered this year's cupping competition.
The awards will be announced on Sunday, November 7th at the Kona Coffee Cultural Festival brunch. We hope to see you there. If you're interested in taking any classes with us or any more information on what Pacific Coffee Research offers, visit our website at pacificcoffeeresearch.com, and we hope to see you in person soon. Aloha.